The cold air pressed against her skin, carrying the stench of rust, mold, and old chains. She sat curled up in the corner of a small cage, her thin body trembling against the iron bars that had been her world for so long. The dim glow of a flickering light bulb above made her orange eyes shine faintly in the darkness. But there was no warmth in them anymore. Her hair, once long and bright, now clung to her face in tangled strands. Every movement of the heavy collar around her neck scraped her skin raw, reminding her that she was nothing more than a possession. Around her, the market never slept. Shouts of traders, the clinking of coins, the cries of other captives, all of it mixed into one endless nightmare. She had stopped counting the days long ago. Maybe weeks. Maybe years. Time did not matter when every day was the same. She had been called many names, beast, pet, thing, but never her real name. They didn't care what she was called. To them, she was only a creature to be bought, owned, and broken. Sometimes she heard footsteps approach, heavy boots scraping across the stone floor. Shadows would fall over her cage, and strange eyes would study her as if she were an object, not a living being. Some laughed at her condition, others sneered, while a few reached through the bars to touch her like she was a toy. Each time, she shrank back, wrapping her arms around herself, wishing she could disappear into the darkness. But the chains clinked every time she moved, reminding her that there was no escape. She remembered the day she was first dragged here. She had screamed, clawed, and fought until her voice cracked, but the slavers only laughed as they clamped the iron collar around her neck. They had paraded her through the market, showing her off to potential buyers. Her dignity had been stripped away piece by piece until nothing remained but silence. Silence was safer. Silence kept her alive. Now she rarely spoke. Her throat was dry, her lips cracked, and when she did whisper, no one listened. The other captives in the market sometimes tried to talk to her, but most of them were sold quickly, leaving their cages empty. She remained. Always unsold, always unwanted. Maybe it was because she looked too broken. Maybe it was because her spirit had dimmed so much that she was no longer interesting to them. Her stomach growled loudly, and she pressed her arms tighter against her body. They fed her scraps, cold and hard, barely enough to keep her alive. She hated herself for still hoping each time the guard threw something her way. She hated the weakness of her own hunger, but no matter how hard she tried to kill that hope, it came back again and again. Survival was cruel. Tonight, the market was unusually loud. Drunken laughter, coins changing hands faster than usual, and the smell of strong drink filled the air. From her cage, she could see blurred shapes moving past, traders boasting of their stock. She kept her head down, not wanting their attention. Attention always led to pain. Then the sound of new footsteps echoed. They were steady, heavier than most, not rushed or careless. She lifted her eyes slightly through her tangled hair. A tall figure was moving slowly between the cages, stopping to glance at each one. The traders followed closely, eager to impress him. She had seen this scene many times before. A new buyer, rich and arrogant, ready to pick a pet to display or abuse. She lowered her head quickly, hiding her face, praying he would pass by without looking. But the footsteps stopped right in front of her cage. She froze. Her heartbeat quickened painfully in her chest. Slowly, she looked up, expecting the same cruel eyes she had always met. But instead, she saw something else. The figure was a human. His clothes were dusty from travel, his boots worn, but his eyes, they were not like the others. They didn't shine with greed or mockery. They looked at her as if she were real. She blinked, confused. She almost thought she was imagining it. Humans rarely came here, and those who did never wasted time staring at broken pets. The trader's voice cut through the moment, boasting about her alien features, about how obedient she had become. He rattled the cage with his hand, and she flinched violently, her chains rattling in answer. The trader laughed. The human didn't laugh. He just kept watching her. His eyes softened for a second, and she felt a strange warmth in her chest, something she had not felt in so long that it scared her. She quickly looked away, ashamed of the dirt on her skin, the scars on her wrists, the weakness in her body. The trader kept talking, lowering the price, trying to convince the human. She expected him to leave like the others. Who would want her now? She was broken, useless, ruined. But instead of walking away, the human reached into his coat and pulled out a pouch. Coins clinked loudly, heavy with weight. The trader's greedy hand snatched it up at once, his grin stretching wide. Her heart stopped. No, this couldn't be happening. She had been sold. Again. Panic rose in her chest, hot and choking. She pressed against the farthest corner of the cage, her chains pulling tight, her breath quick and shallow. Not again. She couldn't survive another master. She couldn't. The human crouched down slowly in front of her cage, close enough that she could see the lines of exhaustion on his face, the roughness of his hands, and the strange calm in his expression. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then he spoke, his voice low and steady, carrying words she didn't understand at first, but his tone was clear. It wasn't a command. It wasn't mockery. It was something else. Her hands trembled as the lock clicked open and the cage door creaked. She stared at the open space before her, fear and disbelief crashing together inside her. For so long, she had dreamed of this moment, but now that it was real, she couldn't move. What if this was a trick? What if he was worse than all the others? The human extended his hand. Her chains rattled as she shifted slightly, her wide eyes locked on his. For the first time in years, the darkness of her cage felt uncertain, like maybe it would not last forever. The chains felt heavier than ever as she stepped out of the cage, her thin legs trembling like they had forgotten how to walk. The human did not pull her roughly as others had done before. Instead, he kept his hand steady, giving her space to move. The trader laughed, clapping his hands together as if he had made the deal of his life. Around them, other buyers whispered in surprise. No one understood why this man had paid so much for a broken alien girl when he could have chosen one stronger, younger, or more beautiful. Her heart pounded against her ribs as she stumbled forward. Every instinct screamed at her to run, but there was nowhere to run to. Chains rattled with every step, reminding her that even if she tried, she could not escape. She kept her head bowed, her silver hair falling over her face, hiding the terror in her glowing eyes. The human walked beside her without speaking, his movements calm, not rushed, not cruel. That silence confused her. Usually buyers barked orders, showed their power, reminded her that she was nothing. This one did not. When they reached the edge of the market, he stopped. The trader called after him, offering more goods, laughing, but the human ignored him. He bent down and unlocked the collar from her neck. The weight fell away, leaving a red mark on her skin, and she gasped quietly. For the first time in years, she felt air against her throat without cold iron pressing into it. She touched the raw skin with trembling fingers, hardly able to believe it. Why would he remove it? Masters never removed the collar. The collar was the symbol that she belonged to someone. Her suspicion grew. She eyed him carefully, waiting for the trick, waiting for the command that would follow. Maybe he was testing her obedience. Maybe he wanted to see if she would run so he could punish her later. That was how it always went. Nothing came free. They walked through the narrow streets of the colony until they reached a small inn. The human pushed the door open and led her inside. The warm air smelled of cooked food, roasted bread, and clean wood. Her stomach twisted painfully at the scent. Hunger clawed inside her, sharper now than ever. She had not smelled real food in years. Her mouth watered, but she forced herself to stay silent, her eyes fixed on the floor. She knew better than to ask. The human spoke briefly with the innkeeper, handing over more coins. Then he turned back to her and motioned for her to sit at a table. She hesitated, her chains dragging across the floor. Was this another game? If she touched the chair without permission, would he strike her? Slowly, she sat down, her body stiff, her eyes still downcast. Moments later, a plate was set in front of her. Steam rose from a bowl of stew, thick with meat and vegetables. The smell nearly drove her mad. She stared at it, unsure. Her mind screamed warnings. Food like this was a trap. Sometimes slavers gave captives rich food just to laugh at them when they ate too quickly, spilling it, then punished them for being greedy. She clenched her fists tightly, refusing to reach out. The human picked up a spoon, scooped some of the stew, and ate it himself. Then he set the spoon down gently in front of her and nodded once, as if telling her it was safe. Her hands trembled as she lifted the spoon. The first taste burned her tongue, but she did not care. Flavor exploded in her mouth. Real flavor, not the dry scraps or sour water she had known for so long. Tears welled in her eyes without warning as she ate faster, desperate, as if the food would vanish any second. She finished the bowl in moments, breathing hard, clutching the spoon like it was her only weapon. When she looked up, the human was watching her. Not with disgust, not with amusement, just watching, as if trying to understand her. She quickly lowered her gaze, ashamed of her hunger, ashamed of her weakness. She whispered an apology, her voice hoarse from disuse. He didn't respond with anger. He simply ordered another bowl and pushed it toward her. Confusion swirled inside her chest. She could not understand his kindness. Masters never cared if slaves starved. They used food as power, as punishment. Why would he give her more? Why would he spend so many coins on someone like her? There had to be a reason. Nobody did anything without a reason. Later, when they left the inn, he gave her a cloak to cover herself. It was soft and warm, and when she pulled it around her shoulders, it felt strange, almost dangerous. Comfort was not for her kind. Comfort was an illusion that always broke apart. She kept her head down, the cloak dragging across the ground as they walked. At night, he took her to a small house on the edge of the settlement. It was quiet, far from the noise of the market. The house smelled faintly of smoke and wood, a lived-in place but clean. He opened the door for her, letting her step inside first. She hesitated, her body tense, waiting for the moment he would push her, chain her, or lock her in another cage. But no cage waited inside. Instead, there was a small room with a bed. The human pointed to it. She shook her head quickly, stepping back. Beds were for masters, not for slaves. She had always slept on the floor, chained in straw or dirt. She could not imagine lying on something soft. The idea terrified her. But he only set down a blanket on the bed and left the room, not forcing her. Her heart pounded in the silence. She curled up on the floor in the corner, pulling the cloak tightly around herself. The bed sat untouched. Sleep did not come easily. Every creak of the house made her flinch. Every thought told her this was a trap. Kindness was always a trick before cruelty. Yet one memory replayed in her mind as her eyes grew heavy. The way he had looked at her in the market, not like a beast, not like a pet, like someone real. She hated herself for remembering it, for feeling that small spark of warmth in the middle of her fear. It was dangerous to hope. Hope always broke you in the end. And yet, for the first time in years, she could not kill it completely. The morning came with a soft light breaking through the small window of the house. She opened her eyes slowly, her body stiff from sleeping curled up on the floor. The cloak still covered her, holding faint warmth from the night. For a moment, she forgot where she was. No cold iron bars pressed against her. No loud voices of traders mocked her. The silence felt so strange that it frightened her. She sat up quickly, her heart beating fast, afraid she had overslept and would be punished. Her eyes darted around the room, searching for chains, for collars, for anything that would remind her of her place. But there was nothing. Only the bed she had refused to touch, still untouched, the blanket folded neatly on top. The wooden floor creaked under her as she stood. The smell of food reached her nose, pulling her toward the other room. She hesitated, pressing herself against the doorway, peeking through the crack. The human was there, standing near a small fire, cooking. The sound of something sizzling filled the air. He moved with calmness, not rushing, not shouting, simply preparing a meal. She held her breath, waiting for him to notice her. When he finally turned, his eyes met hers, and she froze like a trapped animal. He didn't order her closer. He didn't scold her for hiding. Instead, he placed a bowl of warm porridge on the table and stepped back, giving her space. She blinked at the food, confusion mixing with hunger. Slowly, she entered the room, her bare feet quiet against the wooden floor. Her eyes never left him as she moved. She expected him to change suddenly, to reveal the cruelty she knew so well, but he only waited. Her hands shook as she picked up the spoon. The first bite warmed her chest, and she nearly cried again. She ate in silence, every taste both painful and comforting. Painful, because she remembered all the years she had been denied it. Comforting, because it was real now, sitting in her hands. When she finished, she pushed the bowl away quickly, afraid she had eaten too much. Her eyes lowered, her voice cracked as she whispered thanks, the words strange on her tongue. He gave a small nod, then turned back to clean the pot. No words of ownership, no chains offered. The silence between them carried a weight she did not understand. Later that day, he opened the door to the outside. Light flooded the small room, and she raised her arm to shield her eyes. It had been so long since she had seen the open sky. The blue stretched endlessly above her, clouds drifting like pieces of another world. Her breath caught in her throat. She stepped outside slowly, her feet touching soft grass instead of cold stone. The sun touched her skin, and she trembled as if it might burn. Her heart raced as memories flooded back. The cage, the endless dark, the stale air. This open space felt too wide, too unreal. She stumbled forward, her legs weak, before dropping to her knees in the grass. Her hands dug into the soil, feeling the dirt slip between her fingers. Tears ran down her cheeks, silent and hot, as she realized she had almost forgotten what freedom felt like. But freedom was dangerous. Freedom never lasted. Panic struck her suddenly. What if this was just another trick? What if he let her taste the open world only to drag her back inside, laughing at her weakness? She scrambled back toward the doorway, pressing herself against the wall, breathing hard. The human stood nearby, watching her with calm eyes. He didn't move to stop her, didn't chain her, didn't push her back inside. He only said something quietly, his voice steady. Though she didn't understand all the words, she knew one thing. He wasn't threatening her. Still, her body shook with fear. That night, when the sun sank and shadows stretched across the ground, she refused the bed again and curled up on the floor. Nightmares came fast. In her dreams, the traders returned. The cage closed around her again. She screamed, pulling at the chains, but they dug into her wrists. She begged for help, but no sound came from her throat. She woke up with a gasp, her skin wet with sweat, her body shaking violently. The room was quiet, safe, but the terror did not leave her. She pressed her arms tight around herself, whispering that it wasn't real, that she wasn't in the cage anymore. The sound of soft footsteps made her flinch. The human stood in the doorway, watching her carefully. She expected anger for waking him, but it never came. He simply placed a small lantern near her, the gentle light pushing the shadows away. Then he left her alone again. She stared at the light for a long time, her fear slowly softening. For years, she had been punished for weakness. Here, her weakness was not mocked. That frightened her more than cruelty ever had. The next morning, she tried to avoid him. When he spoke, she gave no answer. When he offered food, she ate quickly without looking at him. Her heart told her not to trust. Trust would break her. But a small voice inside whispered something different. That voice, fragile and unwanted, told her he was not like the others. That voice scared her most of all. When he left the house later to gather supplies, she stayed near the door, staring at the open sky. She could run. Her chains were gone, nothing stopped her. But her legs would not move. She realized with a cold shiver that the cage was still inside her. Even with no iron around her, she was trapped by fear. As the day faded, she sat quietly by the window, watching him return with a bundle of wood. He carried it inside, set it down, and gave her a faint smile before lighting the fire. She turned her face away, ashamed of the warmth that touched her chest again. Hope was growing, no matter how much she fought it. She closed her eyes tightly, whispering to herself that it was dangerous, whispering that freedom was never real. But when she remembered the open sky and the grass beneath her fingers, she could not kill the memory. For the first time in years, she was beginning to wonder if the cage in her mind could be broken too. The days passed slowly, each one different from the life she had always known. She was no longer behind iron bars, no longer forced to crawl at the feet of cruel masters. Yet the fear inside her did not leave. At night, she still woke trembling from nightmares of chains and cages. The human never punished her for the screams that escaped her throat in the darkness. He would only light the lantern again, keeping the shadows away until she could breathe normally. But the quiet days did not last. Whispers began to spread through the market and the nearby colony. People had seen the alien girl, the one who had been kept as a pet, walking freely with a human. Traders who had once owned her told their lies, saying she was stolen, saying she was theirs. Greedy eyes turned toward her again, and soon the hunters arrived. It began one evening when she and the human were returning from the edge of the forest. She had followed him there, though she kept her distance, still unsure of his trust. The sun was low, painting the sky with red fire, when she noticed shadows moving in the distance. At first, she thought it was only workers returning home. But the way they walked was different. Too many, Too close, too deliberate. Her chest tightened with dread. She had seen men like this before. Hunters, enforcers, those who tracked down runaways. Their steps were silent, their hands close to their weapons. She froze where she stood, her breath sharp in her throat. Memories of the market came back at once, chains dragging her down, mocking laughter, the endless dark cage. The human noticed her fear and turned his head. His eyes narrowed as he followed her gaze. The group of hunters drew closer, their leader stepping forward with a cruel smile. "You have something that belongs to us," he said, his voice sharp. He pointed toward her. "Hand her over, human. She's property. You know the law." She shrank back instantly, hiding behind the human's shoulder. Her body shook so hard that she could barely stand. She knew how this always ended. Masters argued for a while, then she was dragged away, beaten for daring to think she could be free. Tears burned her eyes, but she did not let them fall. Crying never saved her before. The human did not move aside. He stood straight, his hand resting near the tool at his belt. His voice was calm, but firm. "She doesn't belong to you," he said. "She's not property." The hunters laughed, a hard, ugly sound. "You think your words mean anything here? We have orders. We take her, and you stay alive, or you fight, and both of you die." Their weapons glinted in the fading light, sharp and deadly. Her fear rose higher, clawing at her chest. She tugged at his sleeve, whispering for him to let her go. She was not worth his death. No one ever was. Better to go back to the cage than to see him killed for her. But he shook his head slightly, his eyes never leaving the men before them. The leader gave a signal, and 2 hunters stepped forward. She whimpered and pressed herself tighter against the human's back. She expected him to move aside, to let them take her. Instead, he stepped forward himself, blocking the path completely. His voice came out sharper this time, filled with steel. "You'll have to go through me first." The hunters hesitated. They had not expected resistance. Their eyes darted between each other, then back to the human. He did not move, his stance steady like a wall. The silence stretched, heavy and dangerous. Finally, the leader sneered. "You're a fool, human. She's nothing but a pet. You'll die for nothing." The human's answer was quiet, but the weight of his words struck her deeper than any chain. "She's not nothing." Her throat closed, and she gasped softly, unable to believe what she had heard. No one had ever spoken those words for her. Not once. To every master, every trader, every buyer, she had always been nothing. But now, someone said otherwise. The hunters gripped their weapons tighter, but the human drew his tool, a weapon too, though smaller, older. His hands did not shake. She could see the scars on his arms, the lines on his face. This was not a man who made empty threats. The tension broke when the leader snapped his fingers. The hunters lunged forward. She screamed, covering her ears, waiting for the pain to come. But instead of chains dragging her down, she heard the sharp clash of metal, the heavy thud of boots on soil. She opened her eyes slightly and saw the human pushing one of them back, his weapon flashing in the dim light. Her heart raced, torn between terror and awe. He was only one man, yet he stood against them all. The hunters cursed and regrouped, circling closer. She wanted to run, but her legs would not move. She could not leave him. The leader stepped forward again, his voice full of anger now. "You'll regret this, human. We'll take her, and you'll beg for death when we're done." But the human only raised his weapon higher, his stance unbroken. "Try me," he said. She pressed a hand to her mouth, tears spilling at last. Not from fear alone, but from the crushing weight of what she saw. For the first time in her life, someone stood between her and the cage. Not for profit, not for cruelty, but because he refused to let her be taken. The hunters finally backed away, muttering threats and promises of return. The leader spat on the ground, glaring at the human with hate before signaling his men to leave. The shadows slipped away into the distance, but their promise of danger remained. Her knees gave out, and she sank to the ground, her body shaking with silent sobs. She expected him to scold her for weakness, to call her a burden. Instead, he crouched down, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. His voice was low, steady, and kind. "They won't take you. Not while I'm here." She looked up at him through her tears, unable to speak. Her chest ached with fear, but also with something new. Something she had never dared to feel before. A fragile spark, small but alive, that maybe, just maybe, she was worth protecting. The night felt heavier than usual, as if the darkness itself carried warning. She sat near the window, her eyes fixed on the faint glow of the colony lights far in the distance. Every sound outside made her tense. Every creak of the wooden walls felt like a threat. She remembered the hunters' voices, their promise to return. Fear gnawed at her chest, but she said nothing. The human sat near the fire, his weapon close at hand, his eyes never truly resting. He knew, too. The quiet was only the calm before the storm. When the attack came, it was sudden. The first sign was the smell of smoke, sharp and burning. Then the sound of glass shattering as fire arrows broke through the window. Flames licked the wooden walls, crackling louder with each second. She gasped, stumbling back, her eyes wide with terror. The hunters had come, and they were not waiting at the door. They meant to burn the house down with both of them inside. The human moved quickly. He grabbed a bucket of water and threw it at the nearest flames, but more arrows struck the walls, fire spreading faster than he could fight. The air filled with smoke, thick and choking. She coughed hard, her throat burning, her eyes stinging with tears. She pressed herself against the wall, shaking. This was it. They would burn, and the hunters would laugh as the house collapsed. Through the haze, she saw the human stride toward her. He didn't waste time shouting. He tore a blanket from the bed, soaked it in water, and threw it around her shoulders. The wet fabric clung to her body, heavy but protective. She stared at him, her chest tight, not understanding why he would bother. Fire roared around them, the heat unbearable, yet he placed himself between her and the flames, guiding her toward the door. The door crashed open before they reached it. 2 hunters stormed in, their faces lit by the fire's glow. One grabbed her arm roughly, yanking her away from the human. She screamed, her voice raw with fear, struggling against the iron grip. The human didn't hesitate. His weapon cracked against the hunter's skull, dropping him to the ground. The second lunged at him with a blade, but the human blocked it with his arm, the steel cutting into his skin. Blood flowed, dark against the firelight. Her heart stopped at the sight. He was hurt, badly, yet he pushed forward, striking the second hunter until he fell too. He didn't stop to check his wound, didn't pause to rest. He turned back to her, his eyes steady, even as blood dripped down his arm. "We have to go," he said, his voice hoarse from smoke. She stumbled after him, clutching the wet blanket around her. Flames swallowed the wooden beams, and the roof groaned dangerously above. He kicked the broken door open wider, pulling her into the night air. Cool wind hit her face, but the relief didn't last long. Outside, more hunters waited, their shapes moving in the fire's glow. They circled the house, weapons ready, blocking every path. Her legs gave out, and she fell to the ground, covering her face. "No more," she whispered through tears. "Please, no more." She expected him to leave her, to save himself, but instead he crouched low, lifted her into his arms, and held her close. She gasped, shocked by the strength in his embrace. She could feel the steady thump of his heart against her cheek, strong and unshaken despite the danger. The hunters shouted, moving closer, but the fire gave them trouble too. Flames leapt high, forcing them to step back as the building collapsed in a storm of sparks and smoke. Using the chaos, the human charged through a narrow gap, holding her tightly against his chest. He didn't flinch when embers burned his skin. He didn't falter when blades slashed at him from the shadows. Every step he took was for her. Every breath he drew was to keep her alive. The world blurred around her. The smell of smoke, the roar of fire, the shouts of the hunters, it all faded into the sound of his heartbeat as he ran. Her arms clung to him without thought, her tears soaking into his shirt. For the first time, she wasn't fighting to escape someone's grip. She wasn't struggling against chains. She was holding on because she wanted to. When he finally stopped, they were deep in the forest. The fire was only a faint glow behind them, smoke rising into the night sky. He set her down gently against a tree, his chest heaving with exhaustion. His arm still bled, the wound ugly and deep. She reached for him, her fingers trembling as they touched his sleeve. "Why?" she whispered. "Why do this for me?" He looked at her, his eyes steady even in pain. "Because you deserve more than chains," he said. Her breath caught in her throat, and she shook her head fiercely. "No, I'm nothing. I was always nothing." He leaned closer, his voice softer but firm. "Not to me." The words broke something inside her. Tears poured freely, her body shaking with sobs she could no longer hold back. All her life, no one had risked anything for her. No one had seen her as more than a pet, a slave, an object. Yet here was a human, bleeding, burned, and exhausted, still standing between her and the ones who wanted her chained again. She wanted to speak, to tell him she didn't deserve it, but no words came. Instead, she pressed her forehead against his chest, letting her tears fall silently. He didn't push her away. He placed his uninjured hand gently on her head, holding her as if she were something fragile and precious. The night grew colder, but she felt warmth for the first time that had nothing to do with fire. It was a warmth that came from being seen, from being protected, from being treated like a life worth saving. And though fear still lived inside her, another feeling grew quietly beside it. For the first time, she began to believe that maybe she wasn't nothing after all. The forest was dark and silent, except for the sound of his heavy breathing. He leaned against a tree, his wounded arm wrapped with a strip of torn cloth, blood still seeping through. She sat nearby, her knees drawn to her chest, watching him with wide eyes. The firelight from the burning house was far away now, just a faint glow behind the hills. They were safe for the moment, but not for long. The hunters would not stop. They never stopped. She wanted to speak, to tell him to leave her, to save himself, but every time she opened her mouth, no words came. Instead, she kept staring at him, this human who had fought, bled, and carried her out of the flames. Her heart twisted painfully. She had been told humans were weak, fragile, but what she had seen was strength greater than chains, greater than fire. He finally pushed himself up from the tree. His face was pale, his body tired, yet his eyes still carried determination. "We can't stay here," he said quietly. "They'll track us." She nodded weakly, her body trembling as she stood. She didn't know where he planned to go, but she followed without question. For the first time, she wasn't being dragged forward by force. She walked because she chose to. They reached a clearing where a small ship lay hidden beneath heavy nets and branches. It was old, its metal sides scratched and dented, but it was whole. Her breath caught at the sight. She had never been near a ship before. To her, cages and walls had been the only world. The idea of leaving the planet, of escaping the reach of the hunters, felt impossible. The human pulled the nets away and opened the hatch. He turned back to her and gave a small nod, letting her step inside first. She hesitated, her hands gripping the edge of the metal door. Her body shook as memories filled her mind. What if it was another cage? What if this ship became her prison? Just one more trap disguised as freedom. She looked back at him, and for a long moment, her fear battled with the fragile spark of trust inside her. Finally, she stepped inside. The interior was cramped, with narrow walls and a few worn seats. Lights flickered to life as he pressed the controls, the hum of engines slowly building. She sat quietly, her arms wrapped around herself, watching him with cautious eyes as he worked. His hands moved with skill, flipping switches, guiding the ship as if he had done this many times before. When the engines roared fully awake, her body shook. The ground slipped away beneath them, and the ship rose into the night sky. She pressed her forehead against the small window, staring as the forest shrank into darkness, the flames of the house glowing faintly in the distance. Higher and higher they climbed, until the world below was only a shadow. Then the stars appeared, endless, countless, brighter than she had ever imagined. Her mouth parted in wonder, tears forming again. She had dreamed of freedom, but this was more than freedom. This was a sky without cages. The human glanced at her, noticing the awe in her eyes. For the first time, his lips curved into a faint smile. She didn't smile back, but inside her chest, something stirred, something she hadn't felt in years. Hope. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the hum of the ship. She finally found the courage to speak, her voice low and shaky. "Why do you do this? You risk everything for me. You bleed for me. Why?" He didn't answer right away. His eyes stayed on the stars, his jaw tight. Finally, he said, "Because I know what it's like. To lose everything, to be treated like nothing." His voice cracked slightly, and she stared at him, surprised. He continued, quieter now. "Slavers took my family years ago. My wife, my little girl. I couldn't save them. I wasn't strong enough then. But I won't stand by and let it happen again. Not to you." Her chest ached as his words sank deep into her heart. She had thought humans couldn't understand her pain, couldn't know the weight of chains and loss. But now she saw the truth. His scars were different, but they came from the same fire. His strength came not because he was unbroken, but because he carried his pain and refused to let it rule him. Her hands trembled as she whispered, "I don't deserve this. I don't deserve you fighting for me." He turned to her then, his eyes steady. "You deserve to live. That's enough." She turned her face away quickly, afraid he would see the tears slipping down her cheeks. She pressed her hands tightly to her chest, trying to hold the warmth his words had left there. But their moment did not last. A sharp alarm rang through the ship, red lights flashing across the panels. The hunters had found them. Another ship appeared on the scanner, closing in fast. Her heart dropped, fear freezing her body. She gripped the seat, whispering, "They're coming." The human's face hardened. His hands moved quickly across the controls, guiding their small ship into a sharp turn. The engines roared louder, straining to escape. Stars blurred outside the window as they darted through space, the hunter ship following close behind. The sound of distant weapons echoed against the hull, each blast shaking the walls. She screamed and covered her ears, her body trembling uncontrollably. But then she felt his hand pressed gently against hers, steady and strong. "Hold on," he said firmly. His voice cut through the noise, grounding her. The chase dragged on, every second heavy with fear. The hunter ship was larger, faster, and better armed. She could see the flashes of its weapons through the window, could feel the vibration as shots barely missed. Her breath came in ragged gasps, panic crushing her chest. But the human didn't break. His eyes stayed sharp, his hands steady. He guided the ship into a dense asteroid field, weaving between massive rocks, forcing the hunter ship to slow. Sparks flew inside the cabin as a blast scraped their hull, but still he pushed forward. Finally, after what felt like forever, the scanner showed the hunter ship falling back. The asteroids were too many, too dangerous to follow. The alarm went silent, and the ship drifted into the quiet of deep space. She slumped in her seat, her body weak with relief, tears streaking her face. The human leaned back, breathing hard, his arms still bleeding. Yet even through exhaustion, he looked at her and said, "We're safe, for now." She could not stop staring at him. Every part of her wanted to deny it, wanted to hide behind fear. But deep inside, the truth was breaking free. He wasn't just protecting her. He was giving her something she thought she had lost forever, a chance to live. And for the first time, she began to wonder if maybe she could fight for him too. The silence of deep space surrounded them, but inside the ship, her heart refused to rest. Every shadow in the corners made her nervous. Every soft beep of the scanner made her flinch. She knew the hunters had not given up. Men like that never gave up. The human's wound was worse now, his shirt soaked with dark red where the cloth pressed against his arm. Still, he kept the ship steady, his eyes scanning the controls, his body refusing to collapse. She wanted to speak, to beg him to rest, but her throat closed each time. She had never been allowed to ask anything before. She only knew how to obey or stay silent, but now silence felt wrong. Finally, she whispered, "You need to stop. You're bleeding too much." He glanced at her, his expression calm, though his face was pale. "I'll stop when we're safe." His voice carried no doubt, no fear, only stubborn strength. She lowered her eyes, biting her lip, torn between fear and something far stronger. Something she had never known how to name. Hours passed before the inevitable came. A sharp alarm shrieked again, the lights flashing red across the panels. Another ship appeared on the scanner. Not one this time, but two. The hunters had caught them. Her body froze as cold terror filled her veins. She pressed herself against the seat, whispering no over and over, though the sound was too soft for anyone but her to hear. The human's jaw tightened. He moved the ship as best as he could, but the hunters were ready this time. They fired before he could dodge. Explosions shook the hull, sparks rained down from the ceiling. She screamed, covering her head, the ship lurching violently beneath her. The hunters didn't want to chase anymore. They wanted to destroy. The human fought the controls, but alarms screamed louder. Systems were failing. He turned to her suddenly, his voice strong even in the chaos. "If they board us, you run. Don't stop. Don't look back." Her eyes widened, her chest aching as she shook her head violently. "No, I can't. You can." He cut in firmly. "You've survived worse than this. Don't let them chain you again." His words struck her hard. He believed she could survive, even when she didn't believe it herself. Tears blurred her vision as the ship jolted again. Then came the sound she feared most, the sharp clang of metal as the hunters forced their way in. The door burst open and shadows filled the cabin. Armed hunters stormed inside, their faces twisted with cruel satisfaction. She shrank back instantly, her body curling in on itself, chains clinking in her memory, even though none were on her now. The leader stepped forward, his sneer sharp as a knife. "It's over. Give her up, and maybe we'll let you live." The human stood tall despite his wound, his weapon raised, his voice firm. "She's not yours. She'll never be yours again." The hunters laughed at him. One swung his weapon forward, striking the human across the shoulder. He staggered but didn't fall. Another kicked him down, forcing him to his knees. Blood dripped from his mouth as he struggled to rise again. She cried out, her voice break, "Stop! Please stop!" The leader turned to her, his grin widening. "See? He can't save you. He's only a man. And you're just property. You'll always be property." Something inside her cracked. For years, she had believed those words. For years, she had accepted the chains. But now, watching the human struggle, watching him bleed just to keep her free, the fire inside her finally woke. Her fear trembled, but another feeling grew stronger. Anger. Not at him. At them. At the chains. At every hand that had forced her into the dirt. She rose slowly, her body shaking, but her eyes bright with defiance. The hunters laughed at first, thinking she was weak, but when she wrapped her fingers around a loose metal bar from the wall, they stopped laughing. She swung it hard, striking the nearest hunter in the head. He dropped with a thud, groaning in pain. The cabin exploded into chaos. The human, seeing her stand, surged up with sudden strength, tackling another hunter to the floor. She screamed as another grabbed her arm, but instead of shrinking back, she fought, swinging wildly. Her body, fueled by years of pain, turned into fury. The leader cursed, trying to reach her, but the human blocked him, their weapons clashing in the cramped space. She had never fought before, never believed she could. Yet here she was, teeth bared, arms burning with effort, breaking the chains in her mind, one strike at a time. Every blow she landed was not just against the hunters, it was against the voice inside her that had whispered she was nothing. The fight ended with heavy silence. The hunters lay broken or fleeing, dragging their wounded bodies back through the ship's hatch. Smoke filled the air, the alarm still blaring. The leader, beaten and bleeding, hissed a final threat before disappearing into the dark. This isn't over. She'll never be free. But she didn't believe him anymore. Her chest heaved as she dropped the metal bar, her hands trembling. She turned to the human, who leaned heavily against the wall, his body battered but alive. His eyes met hers, filled with exhaustion, but also pride. She stumbled toward him, falling to her knees beside him. "I thought I couldn't," she whispered through tears. "I thought I was too broken." He reached out with his uninjured hand, brushing her tangled hair from her face. His voice was weak but steady. "You're stronger than you know." Her tears fell faster, but this time they were different. Not just from pain, from release, from freedom. She took his hand in both of hers, pressing it tightly against her chest. For the first time, she didn't feel like nothing. She didn't feel like property. She felt alive. The ship drifted into silence, the hunters gone, the alarms fading. She sat beside him, refusing to let go of his hand. The stars outside stretched endlessly, and for the first time, she saw them not as distant lights, but as paths. Paths they could choose together. She leaned her forehead against his, closing her eyes. "I don't want to run anymore," she whispered. "Not from them, not from myself. I want to live with you." He gave a faint, tired smile, his hand squeezing hers. "Then live. You're free now." Her heart swelled with a warmth stronger than any fear. She was no longer a pet, no longer a captive, no longer a shadow in a cage. She was free. And she chose, with every breath, to stay by the side of the human who had given her that freedom.